Today, we are joined by Mary Beth Reed. Mary Beth Reed is an associate professor of photography and film at VCU Arts in Richmond. Her film poems combining animation, hand painting, and optical printing have screened in festivals, including the New York Film Festival, Views from the Avant-Garde, the Black Maria Film Festival, and the Rotterdam International Film Festival. Reed earned her MFA in experimental animation from the California Institute of the Arts, an MFA in film and video from Bard College, a BFA in film production from the University of Colorado Boulder, a BA in film studies and art history from the University of Colorado Boulder, and her BA in religion from the College of William and Mary. Wow. All right, we are so happy to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's maybe obvious that I like reading classes. I enjoyed them at William and Mary too. So thanks for being here. I'm just gonna hit presenter. Okay, so there we go. This is a project that I've been working on for many years. I think probably since 2003, roughly. And it has many different versions on different media. The most recent version of it will be finished when it's complete. It will be a model train board with multiple screens playing animation and some live action within the landscape of the train board. So it's based on, initially it was based on the general history of Colorado, and with one section on the Rocky Flats Superfund site, which is between Boulder and Denver in Colorado. The Rocky Flats part kind of took over as the dominant part of the project, but originally it started out with Mesa Verde and the Anasazi cliff dwellers, and then there were a few shots of animation dealing with the Sand Creek Massacre and the Ludlow Massacre. The Sand Creek Massacre, Native Americans were killed. And the Ludlow Massacre involved miners and their families, and I think Pinkertons. And then Marble, Colorado is actually a location. It's in the mountains and southwestern Colorado, and it's a marble quarry. It's at the top of a mountain, so I always think of quarries being further down, but there are big chunks of marble at the top of this very narrow mountain road. But some of the marble from there was used in the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, DC. More along the outside of the monument and the columns, not the statue itself. And then Rocky Flats nuclear weapons trigger production plant. That was operational from the early 50s to the early 90s. And many people in the area didn't know that it was producing nuclear weapons triggers. There are triggers that go in the bombs, plutonium triggers that I guess start the ignition process for a nuclear missile. And for many years, it was just very mysterious what was going on. Kristen Iverson lived right near there. I can't remember, if it was I think in Westminster, just a little southeast of where the Rocky Flats site is. And she wrote Full Body Burden. I can't remember exactly what year, but roughly 2000, maybe 2010, 2011. And she details a lot of the incidents that happened there that created leaks into the surrounding areas, into the groundwater and the soil. Sometimes the particles of plutonium were windborne, so going over the surrounding neighborhoods. So the FBI raided Rocky Flats in 1989 after hearing about several concerning things from some whistleblowers inside the plant. And that was called Operation Desert Blow. And after that, there was a remediation process until about 2006, where they dismantled many of the buildings. They shipped some of the toxic materials to other toxic waste storage places around the country. They buried some of the toxic waste. The soil had been contaminated, so they did a remediation process where the soil was combined with non-toxic soil and depending on the level of toxicity in the soil, there were certain distances from the ground that it could be. So if anything from like the ground level and 3 feet down had to have a much lower toxicity level. Then from 3 feet to 6 feet, it could have more toxic materials in it. And then from 6 to 12, greater than that. And these levels of toxicity are well above what would normally be considered safe. So, sorry, I'm bumming you out with some fun stuff about toxic waste. Then the last thing here, the Cold War sculpture, the Cold War horse sculpture by Jeff. This is my little replica version of it. I've got 3 of these horses that will be on the train board in the final. It's actually a huge statue that I've only seen in pictures. I tried to see it in person a few years ago, but I don't think it was standing at that point. But it's a horse covered in like a hazmat suit, a red hazmat suit, and it's got like a little respirator, and it was on a pedestal, and it was put up right near a very pretty large residential housing complex that was very close to Rocky Flats. And many of the residents didn't know the history of the contamination, just right by their neighborhood. Okay, so Kristen Everson's book details the different types of toxic materials that are around there, predominantly plutonium and other toxic chemicals that are used in the process or part of the waste that's left over. And there was a grand jury hearing in the late 90s, and the findings were closed to the public, and anyone on the jury was forbidden from revealing details about it. And some of the jurors actually risked prison time and started talking about it openly when they heard that the area around the Rocky Flats plant was going to be turned into a wildlife refuge, and then would be open for like hikers and bikers to go through the area. And they were pretty horrified at that thought. And actually, I think around 2018 or 2019, the area was open for people to go ahead and use it as a recreational area. Okay, so onto the animation. When I started it, I was still dealing more in general with Colorado history, and I have some storyboards to show you. These are more like stills of chapters, essentially. So many storyboards are much more complex than this and really break down every shot and angle that's going to be covered in the story. But these are, like I said, just basically frames that represent a chapter in the film. So it starts with the mountains being created, then the dinosaurs, more mountains, and the saber-toothed tiger, I guess that one is there. And then it jumps ahead to about 1000 AD to the Mesa Verde cliff dwellings. Those are in southwestern Colorado, and in the surrounding areas, Arizona, New Mexico, there are also other ancient cliff dwellings. And let's see, the people, there's been some mystery surrounding why the people just all of a sudden left that area. There's no evidence of them being there after 1100, common error, I'll say. And there are many theories that maybe they exhausted all the resources around, like the trees that they used for fuel and building, the plants that they used in the cultivation, or that there were wars between surrounding tribes. So there are a lot of possible reasons, and I'm not that current on what the most recent findings have been, but I think a combination of different things. Then it goes to buffalo being on the prairie right around the time of like European settlers moving in. And part of the film is told through the effects on prairie dogs. There are prairie dog colonies in Boulder that I used to ride my bike around the trails, and you could ride right past through a prairie dog colony. And it's hard not to stop and see what's going on. So prairie dogs pop up intermittently throughout the film. And then it transitions to miners mining in the mountains for gold and silver. More about the mining actually being in the mountains. And then the Sand Creek Massacre is the first massacre that appears in the film. And then the trains are kind of crossing the landscape. and buffalo are beginning to disappear. The Ludlow massacre occurred in 1913, and the deaths were women and children who were hiding in the basement of a home. They died from smoke inhalation. Then fading into a cattle ranch, which is jumping up to pretty much to current times. And it jumps back to how it affects prairie dogs, because ranchers and people living in the areas have, I'm not sure, a love-hate relationship or just a hate relationship with prairie dogs, mostly because of the burrows they create can be difficult for the cattle. And when they're a successful colony, they could really spread out. Then people coming for recreation purposes in Colorado, buffalo coming back in herds. The University of Colorado Boulder's mascot is a buffalo, Ralphie. And then we go to Rocky Flats. And in my version of it, Jello represents the toxic waste. And the toxic waste is transported all over the country. And we follow one group of soldiers who are accompanying the tanker carrying Jello. It wasn't quite as flashy as I make it in this. Mostly it was like unmarked tankers, and really I don't know how much was transported on trains. From my research, it's been primarily highways, semis, and SUVs accompanying them. Okay, so this is one version of, like, still the storyboard. I wouldn't quite call it an animatic, but it does have a little bit of video or film footage in it. Often after people complete the storyboards, they'll make an animatic, which is just the storyboard shots, but in a film format where the shots are timed to how long they would actually take in the film. And it gives people a good sense of the rhythm and what works and what doesn't. Like if it's too static and they need more movement or different shots or cutaways, that's a good indicator. And often it includes sound, especially dialogue, if there's dialogue in it. Sorry, there is probably no sound in this. And this is partly me, it's with film that I shot, playing with little dinosaur toys and different shaped glass. And the Mesa Verde, when I was doing some line animation with that background, and then the little figures that were taken off of pottery from the area. And then the mining, actually, most of it ended up being cut out animation, but this is from a mining museum in Leadville, Colorado, some of the glass windows. And they also have a really fabulous diorama of mining communities there. And the prairie dogs pop up with houses crashing down on them. In this version, the 10th Mountain Division was an Army division of skiers that trained in Colorado, and that was in an original version of this, but it didn't quite make it into this version. So that's just a little brief sketch of some of those chapters in the original film. So story development. This is a little TV spinoff. This is a spinoff from the Colorado Lode Rocky Flats original one, and it focuses on the prairie dogs. This is just an example of breaking down the story that I was thinking about in prose, and then this one is a slight shift where it's a bit more narrative, more of an action film, prairie dogs trying to escape after being relocated. And that's just a couple pages of the story. And this is essentially a shot list describing what's going on in each shot. So this is a different version of storyboards, but more focused on bubonic prairie, or the escape from bubonic prairie, which is what I ended up calling it. And this one more just drawings, not necessarily in the format of storyboards, which are sometimes like regularly shaped rectangles or things like that. So prairie dogs hanging out on the prairie. Then the buffalo come in, and buffalo actually benefited from prairie dogs because the prairie dogs would eat a lot of the little grasses, and then more like tasty herbs and things would grow in place of that. So that's one thing. The buffalo are not getting the well-balanced meal that they had when prairie dogs were all over the prairies. There's a stampede that leads to, I think in this case, it's a dog coming to attack, but also settlers start coming onto the landscape. The prairie dogs bark to talk to each other, and they have very distinct barks. Some are warning barks telling them to get into their burrows. This is a warning bark. And then into the burrows, settlers are coming through. For a long time, prairie dogs were seen as potential pets, so people would capture them and keep them. The title actually comes from the fact that the prairie dogs carry the bubonic plague, and it's very rare that it's transmitted to humans, but it does happen, I think, between 1 to 4 times a year. But if it's caught soon enough, people will be fine. But it can also be devastating to prairie dogs, like it can wipe out 90% of a colony. Okay, so the prairie dogs are all over, and then the settlers come in and the prairie dog colonies start to vanish. The houses, again, this you saw earlier, houses falling down. This one prairie dog was captured and became a pet in a young child who really liked science and lived in their bedroom. So in this story, the prairie dog is highly intelligent and able to understand complex scientific theories and is just absorbing that well-being in this child's room. And then the father is on the other side of the window there reading about prairie dogs being relocated. So the father decides that it's not fair to keep the prairie dog there in the home without other prairie dogs and takes it to the new colony. The prairie dog runs into some burrows that were already there, and water starts filling up one of the burrows because there are people shooting water into the burrows to get the prairie dogs out so they can capture them to relocate them. And prairie dogs are floating on the water coming up through all the burrows. Again, they're relocated, but this time it is right in the middle of a very large highway. This is really close to, I'm blanking on my Colorado names. Right after Louisville, Flatirons Crossing, I think is what it's called. It's a giant mall, and there are condos and houses around there. They actually did locate prairie dogs kind of close to that. So there would be prairie dog carnage along the highway sometimes. So because this prairie dog had a really good education, she has a plan that they can look for a wormhole to escape to a better place. And she tells that to her prairie dog friends. And this is a kind of an expanded version of that idea. In this one, the dog is actually chasing the prairie dog into the hole. Similar things happen, but there's a whole love story added where 2 of the prairie dogs, one is called Marshmallow and the other one is Zwingli. Zwingli's the science prairie dog. Marshmallow is really well fed until they're relocated and houses start coming in. So, and then also the cattle ranchers trying to poison the prairie dogs to get them out of the burrows. Again, with the dogs being relocated, and then they're all in cages. This is a bit more primitive, the added shots here, and Marshmallow becomes emaciated so much that they've got an extra layer of skin that kind of hangs like a cape from them. It's a little morbid. I guess I should have had some kind of warning. And then Zwingli has a bunch of pups and she's trying to keep them safe and explaining to them how they got in the situation to begin with. And there's the mall again in the highways. She starts telling the pups about the wormhole possibility and she explains it to the prairie dog elders. Oh, I think these are a little bit out of order, but this prairie dog thinks it's hysterical and starts laughing at her idea and she feels a little rejected at that. But Marshmallow, meanwhile, is out on the prairie and searching for things and starts barking because Marshmallow has actually found a wormhole. And it's trying to tell Zwingli, the pups, and all the other prairie dogs, the wormhole is open, you better get here quick. And while they hear Marshmallow and they all run towards the wormhole, an eagle comes down to get lunch, basically. And the prairie dogs are running towards the wormhole. The eagle's coming. Oh, I think these are out of order again. Sorry about that. So the prairie dogs are about to jump in when the eagle grabs Marshmallow and flies off. And the other prairie dogs are really upset and don't really want to leave without Marshmallow, but they've got to go because the wormhole is closing. But they make it through the wormhole Marshmallow is actually dropped by the prairie dog, so this is the one that's out of order. Meanwhile, it's supposed to be right up here on the left side there. Drops Marshmallow because of the Marshmallow didn't have any fat to grab onto, so it's so emaciated. So, and then Marshmallow's cape of skin enables Marshmallow to fly into the wormhole. This is all based on reality. So they end up on a different planet looking back at the toxic Earth far in the distance. And they've got all the wonderful food they need. Oh, another one out of order. That's the wormhole. They're in the wormhole being transformed to another universe. This is a design that I was thinking it would be in. David, there's a person who did a book, a children's book that won many awards called The Golem. And it's a really beautiful cutout style. And I was kind of imitating that style. So just layers of like fancy paper, sparkly paper, mountains, prairie dog holes. And then the prairie dog is like a kind of felt material on, but it's paper, like the little furry paper. And the buffalo is that same kind of material. Part of the buffaloes that you'll see shortly come from Edward Mybridge's a study of animals in motion. This is really helpful to animators in general. It's got multiple books of, yeah, I mean, it's going from, it's all along the x-axis, I guess, horizontal movement. It's great to use as appropriated material. So basically stealing the shapes of the buffalo. So this is a buffalo walk cycle. And this turns up in a little clip of film that we're going to watch in a minute. So now we're jumping ahead to the animatic of Escape from Bubonic Prairie. This does have some audio, but I think I can just tell you what it is. So there's sounds of construction, and we see all these buildings going up. And that was the love story blooming. I sped this up because it was about 3 minutes long. So hopefully you remember the story I told you. This is happening really fast. The cows were there, filling the landscape, trains, more houses. Yeah, since dissolves are great. This is the wormhole theory, and Zwingli is explaining it to the pups and to the elders. And I have a squeaky toy making all of their voices, so there's a lot of squeaky toy laughter coming up. And Zwingli's not sure what they're going to do to survive, but Marshmallow comes along, sees the wormhole. Here we've got a little bit of movement there. And the eagle's coming, and this is in the correct order. And the pups start jumping into the wormhole. Marshmallow is released, flies into the wormhole. And that's what it looks like when you're in a wormhole. And after that, they end up in a much safer, cleaner environment. So that's Escape from Bubonic Prairie in a nutshell, basically. Oh, no, this is, there we go. So this is actually part of the Marble series, Marble, Colorado. And this is the cutout style that predominates in the work at the moment. And I'm usually combining different ideas. Like I was thinking about the glass ceiling for women. So the miners show up as one of the Gibson girl cutouts, and it's all duplicated. So it's the same image, a bunch of miners covering the hills, although there they are. Buffalo are helping out, and I did mention that the hand was not made in Marble, Colorado, but just, to make an exciting story, I decided to have the actual Lincoln Memorial, all the parts show up here in the mining town. And this ties in with the train theme throughout the train board. So that's the Marble, Colorado section. I'm going to talk a little bit about different types of materials and different elements within the project. I used a lot of Jello. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I make the Jell-O and I film it. Sometimes I'm shaping it under the lights, so it makes it all shiny and different, like really sparkly. Actually, it's wonderful. It's like it's the virtual reality where it's all the senses are included. I can smell the Jell-O because the lights are hot and kind of melting the Jell-O and the sugar. It's just really great. Cutouts, paper cutouts, sometimes scrapbook paper works well, photographs as backgrounds often. The MyBridge walk cycles, 16mm film, that's what I started on initially in 2003. I use clear leader. I brought some 16mm film here to just show you the size. So this right here is clear leader. There's no image on it. Basically, the emulsion is gone already. This is actually, you can see now it's got images. Actually, if you wanted to see it upright, it would be this way. And we'll see some of these images in just a minute. But so this is black and white footage, but I can actually buy just clear leader if I want to make it myself, if I want to just develop it and wash all the emulsion off. And so my finger going across, that is about 1 frame of 16mm film. And when I paint on film, I paint on the emulsion side. So the one side is the base where it's like the plastic holding the emulsion. It's very slick and shiny. The emulsion side is a bit more sticky. So I can tell which side is sticking right now. My finger's sticking on this side right here. I would tape this on paper, usually like a large, like white, like art paper, and just kind of loop it around and then get out a bunch of different paints and just start painting on it. Let it dry, and then I would spray it with crystal clear to keep the paint on there until I can get it onto an optical printer to copy it onto film. So now I could do it. I could probably scan it on a scanner and just have it as a digital form instead. But I would, in the early 2000s, I would print it onto film, so then the paint wouldn't fall off every time I projected it or worked with it. And once it's on film and I had a copy of that, I can combine it with other layers like foreground or background. And then I've got abstract paint essentially as one layer. So 16mm clear leader. Oh yeah, so a lot of the cutout animation, I did the cutouts by hand and took photos of them, and I took photos of the different parts of the animals. And then actually, I think I scanned them in at that point. And then I would use them in Photoshop to clean them up a bit, and After Effects to animate them. But you could actually do it just like, so this is Hue. This is a Hue, H-U-E, little camera for animation. It's a little kit that I got. It's only, I guess, maybe $60. And a USB cable hooks it up to a camera or a computer. And I can use this to, actually, I wouldn't need to hook it up to a camera. It is a camera. I can use this to capture animation. And it's really flexible. You can see that. Lots of times animators are shooting essentially like a down shooter. Yeah, where there's a camera above looking down, and the animation takes place on a flat surface so they can move the different parts. Sometimes with stop motion though, like clay animation, object animation, they're gonna have a little mini set like things. So like if the horse were up here, I could have the camera looking, directly at it. So the world is up here with this camera. When it's connected, I can move it wherever I want. A couple of things to think about in animation are registration, like keeping, ideally the camera would be locked in place, because when the background is moving unintentionally, it's really hard for people to not notice that and to get absorbed in the story. So having a camera that doesn't move and then having the animation all take place on a little stage helps kind of keep that illusion of life, basically. And when people are shooting down, having the paper in registration also helps. I don't think I have it, but sometimes people use index cards as animation paper, and it's really simple. They could just have, I'll just use my phone. If they just, well, it's not really a right angle. They just put 2 pieces of tape down, kind of build it up a little bit, so it's a little edge. They can slide the index card right into that corner, so it's always registered when they're drawing it. And then when they take images of it, either scanning it, as long as they have it in place in registration, it's going to look like the background doesn't move at all, but the animation is just like taking off on its own. So registration is very important. Okay, and Premiere I use to compile the movies and export them. So there is some live action footage. I mentioned this. This is actually we can pass this around, but if you get to the images, it looks kind of blobby already. I hand process in buckets or tanks where I just basically unspool the film after I've shot it in the dark into a tank. I put the lid on, and then I pour the chemicals into the tank and shake them. If you've ever done still photography, so if you guys want to pass that around, you can see a lot of chemical manipulation going on. We're actually going to watch a little clip from that and show you some solarization that occurred. And if you've done still photography, photographers are very careful when they're winding film onto little spindles before they put it in the tank. So the film is not touching any other bit of film. When I do 16mm, and many people who do it on their own, it's all going into one bucket or a tank, and it's just smashed in there like spaghetti. So depending on how vigorously people agitate the tank, it can have a lot of scratches on it, or it can have less scratches. I've seen people hand process, students hand process, and it's been virtually scratch free. So I think I'm maybe impatient because I usually end up with scratches on mine. So the live action is usually footage that I have shot and then hand processed, and some of the live action is found footage that I've then copied onto different film stocks and processed it in a way that it was not meant to be processed, so it doesn't look like the original footage. So this is just a still from some cyclists on a mountain trail in Aspen, just black and white footage. This has some solarization in it. There's a person walking in the aspen trees, but the blues and grays and purples are more solarization, but I think also accentuated by After Effects, a filter effect in that. And then this is some original found footage of buffalo grazing. I copied it onto color print stock, which is a very slow stock with almost imperceptible grain. And I also hand processed that with the E6 process for reversal film epichrome. So not the process intended for this stock. And I did not use the correct filters doing it when I was shooting it. And also, so I intentionally didn't do it. I like doing things that you're not supposed to do because I don't know how it's going to turn out. And I like that kind of unexpected result. Chance operations, all about John Cage and things like that. Another thing with this one, this image, the grays exist because the developer was getting exhausted. So there would be more, it would be more colorful if the chemicals were fresh, but I tried to do as many rolls as possible when I was hand processing. So then there's a little section I mentioned, painting on film. There's some abstract parts to the film. I was working with mats, like traveling mats, the buffalo and prairie dogs. So this was a little clip that I was experimenting with that, like bypacking, having strips of hand paint with, in this case, it would be the negative of the buffalo. So the negative of the buffalo would not be getting exposed. It would just be covered up. Actually, the positive of the buffalo would be covered up. And then the background would be filling in with hand painted film. Then I would take the same film, rewind it, and then run it through again, but this time with the opposite version of the buffalo. And then the paint fills in what was not exposed in the previous thing. So it's just like filling in the empty area. So it's two different kinds of paint going on there. This is a prairie dog version. This is a prairie dog love story in paint. It's actually really short. They just eat, and that's it. So really optimistic. They're together for the rest of their lives. This is another clip. I'll just talk through it. So, it's not playing very well there. Is it playing okay here? No, it's kind of stuttery. Oh, it's playing great on my computer. Let's see. Way back in that. Let me escape for a second. I'll see if it plays better on. Oh, so I don't know if actually I wasn't paying attention to the animatic up on there. I was looking on my screen. It was playing just fine. So hopefully it wasn't freezing there either. Let's see. I'm still sharing, so. Oh, that's supposed to be moving. It's moving. So there's a Jello as like a displacement map, and then some hand painted stills, and then buffalo mats, and inside the buffalo are orchids from an orchid show that was in Denver. This is the buffalo footage that I have the still of, and something else. Oh, I think the hand painted buffalo and the prairie dog love story are coming up next. And I'll put this on my Vimeo page and give you guys a link if you want to see it actually moving like this. Sorry, it's unpleasant watching it on a little screen. And that buffalo isn't really animated, it's more the paint that's animated. The original buffalo walking across the screen, they're supposed to be doing walk cycles. And our prairie dogs are about to meet. Okay, it's moving much faster. So I really like abstraction. I can't explain it. It's kind of like ASMR videos. I like those too, but it's hard to explain to someone who doesn't like them. Anyway, but I'm sure you guys, we don't need to go into that. All right. So escape. Oh, so actually I have to apologize because I wasn't paying attention during the other animatic either. Okay, so this is one animation term. There we go. What two animation terms? There's straight ahead animation and then keyframe animation. A lot of what I'm doing when I'm filming animation, especially object animation, is straight ahead animation, where I start from one frame, I go to the next image, after moving it, the next image. So it's all sequential, all linear. And lots of times it's difficult to go back and fix things because I start at one point and get to the end. So I really can't jump back in at a certain point to change it. Keyframe animation, lots of like drawing line animation is keyframe animation, where people are doing like, if I'm, let's see, throwing a ball, because that's always a classic animation, when I'm throwing the ball. There are points where my arm is at like here it's like at the lowest point behind my back. Here it's at the highest point basically, and there it's kind of the end point, and the ball goes off. Those would be keyframes, like moments of the extreme moments. And then in betweens are everything that happens to get from one keyframe to the next. And old school animation, there would be artists who did the keyframes, and then other artists who did the in-betweens. They were the in-betweeners. And now we have programs that do that for us. You can put in the keyframes, and the program software will interpolate what you're intending to do between one keyframe and the next. I can tell you guys I had lots of great experiences with keyframing. Does this come up a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's the animator, and I'm just like, whoa, how did that happen?
It's magic. But it's only magic if the registration is correct. So just kidding. So yeah, so basically the straight ahead is you create the first pose. Like this is not a posable character, but if it were, I turn the head a little bit, take a photo, turn the head a little bit more, take a photo. Or actually we'll just have it spin around. So one photo, move it, another photo, move it, another photo, move it. I play it back, it looks like I just went. So that's basically straight ahead. And shooting on ones, twos, or threes is all part of that in either keyframe or straight ahead. If I shoot on ones, the motion is going to be very fast. If I shoot on twos, that just means for each pose, I'm just taking, I'll have my camera here. We'll use Hugh. We'll get Hugh busy. So Hugh takes one photo, two photos, and then I move the Cold War horse. One photo, two photos. Move it again. One photo, two photos. Keep doing like that. So 2 photos for each pose. It's a little bit slower and a little bit smoother. Sometimes animators choose to shoot on 3s, which would be even a little bit slower and smoother. Shooting on 4s gets to start looking like a slideshow, sometimes depending on what the action is. So those terms, shooting on 1s, 2s, or 3s, it's common in animation. And it's also essentially like if you have stills that you put into a program like Premiere, you could always slow them down 50%. That would essentially be doubling every image, so you'd be shooting on twos. I can't remember why I put frames per second into this conversation, but 16mm film has 24 frames in a second, and that's usually projection speed is 24 frames a second. And video is it's either 24 or 29.97, or 25 can be even lower if it's just going to the web. And again, so shooting on ones with 16mm, for example, there'll be 24 different images. If I shoot on twos, there are only 12 different images for that same second, and so on. This is an example of straight ahead animation. And this you should be able to see moving because it's just me pushing the forward key. So, oh, no, it's not moving. Wait, I'll have to go slower. The registration is actually all over those first few frames, but now the prairie dog is barking. And then the stop barking. Okay, so that didn't work as well as I thought it would. Zoom messes up there. But it helped us get through the pandemic, so it's all right. There we go. So that is, there are two arms. There's the body, the tail, and the head. Those are all separate pieces, and they're moving. Not all of them should be moving in every instance, but there they were. Replacement animation is another thing that happens in stop motion often. Basically, instead of having a character that just all the parts move, especially for mouths, if the character is saying something, they might have different mouth poses, and they just put on one mouth, take a few frames, take that mouth off, put on another mouth, take a few frames, and so on. So it's actually keeps the characters from breaking apart, and sometimes looks smoother. Nightmare Before Christmas has a lot of replacement animation, and so this isn't going to work, but this is actually a walk cycle that I've stolen from a classic animation book, maybe Richard Williams' book, and I just put helmets on their heads. This is let's see, the video. Oh, okay. No. I'm gonna start it again, and this is just like a little bigger than me sharing my phone with all of you. Oh, so the little soldiers are moving. It's basically one soldier that's been repeated many times and just like change the size so it looks like a whole army. Okay, they're done marching. Oh, no, I don't need to do that now. Okay, so this is from the same book. I'm stealing a walk cycle in this book, and they've got their helmets on. But this time, there you go. So you can actually see the walk cycle, two different walk cycles. So in this case, I did replacement animation where I cut them out of Jello, like each of the different poses. And some of the poses are a little bit mushier than others. And then I just repeated the stills of the images so it looked like they're walking. They're walking pretty slow. And there's a big shadow on either side, but there we go. So this one probably gonna have to. This is where the little soldiers come along and they start accompanying the tanker across the country. In this story, they are going to the Savannah River site in South Carolina. So that was actually a lot of fun too. They melted, so that was the end of the soldiers. It was fun while it lasted. Okay, this is another film. So sorry about this. I will put this up somewhere and send it to you guys. Remember, oh, this is Rocky Flats section of it. I think in the most recent version, might be missing a little bit, but Jello in the background, purple Jello, and then clay with little cutouts. I think I try to find the method that will take me the longest amount of time. Part of it is enjoying the process. I think I could think things out a little bit better though and do it quicker, but I really do enjoy playing with toys and clay and Jello. So This is a Gefertile, a giraffe turtle. And I'll show you another mutant coming up. And let's see, burn toxic plants, rename wildlife refuge, and ship toxic waste to South Carolina. There were talks of having toxic waste going to Yucca Mountain in Nevada, but then it was deemed that the geological surveys were not accurate. It was actually a very unstable environment for toxic waste to be sitting. So then they thought they could turn them into like glass sheets basically and store them that way. So they'd be much less dangerous, but still quite toxic.
Do you know where and like what happened to it in South Carolina, where it went?
I think it's there at the Savannah River site storage place. And I met a, oh, sorry, it's not done. We have some crabs coming, some mutant crabs. I met a doctor who worked at an ER there nearby. I was doing, still not done. This is a long one. So luckily for us, there is toxic waste everywhere in every state of the country. So no one will be left out of this fun.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I lived in Savannah and there's a paper mill there that like makes the air smell like sulfur, and all of the neighborhoods around there, there's like a big environmental justice sort of movement and discussions happening. So I was just wondering like where exactly it was in relation to
I think it's near Columbia,
that. Okay.
South Carolina. Yeah, so you still have the other ways to contend with, but not
Right,
this
right.
necessarily. Yeah, so I met a doctor, an ER doctor. I was doing a temp job at Universal Studios for a marketing research company where I had to try to get people who were trying to go on the Jurassic Park log flume ride or the Mummy roller coaster to come in and do like taste testing and stuff instead. And he actually came with this family and he was telling me like they had special drills like to deal with toxic waste and things in the hospital when they had patients. And I was kind of blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, that's I'm making animation, and toxic waste is very serious, but it's not as real of an issue for me as it is for someone like actually working with it and the effects of it. Yeah. So yeah, you just have the paper mill stuff to deal with. I know that smell. I grew up in a paper mill town in Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, it's crazy.
and you'll never forget it. So the most recent version of this is a train board with multiple screens playing different types of animation. And the idea is that I will have 3 train tracks. Two tracks will be kind of like a part of the nuclear energy symbol of like, can't really do it. 2 circles sort of, actually, I guess they're ovals sort of intersecting. And the 3rd track is actually going to be hidden, but it's going to have little joggers, runners, and cyclists on top of it. So it looks like they're running through the landscape, but they're actually just taking a ride on the train. And this is, I was given a saddle by a friend, and the satellite it's been turned into a mountain range, and that's one of the screens will be on the saddle. And this is actually another one to watch. I should have made it bigger too. Is it moving? Oh, well, the buffalo that you've already seen, they're moving in there in the saddle. Just a close up. There are actually little trees all over the saddle at this point to make it look more like mountains, and it will have snow. That's the train board with a much larger scale, 029 scale, I think. But I decided that scale was too big, so I've switched to HO scale for the 2 trains and then N scale for the smaller train. These are just some images of the models I've been making for the train, kind of trying to think out how they're going to work. This is the flat irons. Getting closer to the flat irons, just painting the foam, like the insulation foam, and then just like furniture foam. Just painting it and putting on some molding materials. And now we've got some grass and foliage. There are some bushes that turn up. The trail, this is supposed to be Chautauqua by the Flatirons in Boulder, Colorado. And you can't see it, but there are little people in there too. So there will be people in the final version. And this is one that once I build the little sections, I take them in and see how they look. Yeah, so that's the Flatirons next to the mountain. It's actually a tunnel as well. And this is a little neighborhood in Boulder and some of the trails. The close-up, another close-up there. This is Stanley Lake, which is right near Rocky Flats. It did have some of the creeks that drained off of Rocky Flats ran into Stanley Lake. People were not allowed to wade or swim in the lake because if they went in along the banks, it would stir up the sediment along there. But people are allowed to boat in the lake. They just can't like get wet. It's a little frightening. Has a close up there. And this is a farm, a cattle farm close by to Rocky Flats. This is one of my mutants, a two-headed cow. It really disturbs my mom. She's like, it can't walk anywhere, it'll tear itself apart. And then the 3 horses. And then this is close to the last thing. It's just a little clip. It's moving probably enough to see. This is the hand processed footage, and it's been solarized. And you really can't see details of the horse, so this will probably be one layer in another element of the film. And so solarizing, I'm just exposing the film to light before it's finished processing. So it has kind of a positive and negative look all at once. These are just some of the little elements of it, the toxic part. This is kind of how I figure out how things will work. I just sort of start arranging them and see if it works. I've been using the black light paint. So if there is a black light at some point, all the toxic things will show up. And that's just another version of some of the diorama on it. More close-ups. This is, yep, 91 and 91. So 1 minute for questions. Sorry, it's, I will stop sharing.
There's no one in the classroom afterwards if you want a few more minutes.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I'm fine. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to like hog all the time, but yeah, so if you have questions and Zoom people, I can look at the chat too.
Yeah, I'm happy to read out the
great.
Zoom questions. Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, why Jello? Like it seems really messy, sticky, right?
I love it. I love the like, is it healthy? I mean, I'm sure it is. It's not vegan for sure. And the colors of it are bizarre, and then we eat it. Yeah, I like Jello and just fun to play with. Yeah, just something different too. Different look.
So you've been like working on this for a long time. Do you go through periods where you're doing more of one particular kind of animation or like process of building, like working with materials versus like storyboarding? It's just, I wonder how your process has sort of unfolded over time.
Yeah, segments, definitely, yeah. So I originally shot on film, some of the earlier parts of it, and then After Effects and cutting out things. But lately, like the last 2 summers and a little bit during the fall and spring semesters, it's been building the models, the landscape parts, and that's new to me as well. So I'm enjoying it. It's taking a long time, but I still have a few ideas, but I'm getting to the point where I have to make the board bigger. I don't think it's going to be big enough for all the ideas, and I should come to a point where I actually just finish it. Because I can always make a series, but for some reason I'm not really ready to just separate myself from it yet. But then also the film, like shooting this there's really no animation in that film strip that I just showed you, but playing around with the film and how I'm processing it for me is part of it, and the lights. I have a fog machine that I'm dying to use too to film that. I have to do it outside because it sets off fire alarms. So, so I have lists of things that I want to do basically, and it usually is kind of compartmentalized. So right now I have like supplies to build the landscape and that fog machine. So yeah.
Hillary asked, how did you first become attracted to animation? So amazing, by the way. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That's a good question. I think primarily it was one of my professors in Colorado, Stacy Steers, who does a lot of animation, cutout animation, line animation. She does installations. She's got Night of the Hunter. Yeah, wait, Night Hunter. Night of the Hunter is a film. She has Night Hunter animation, but it's a dollhouse that has little scenes going in each room of animation from the film. So Stacy was definitely a huge inspiration for me in terms of animation. I like the tactile aspect of it, the touching things and moving things and just being much more physical than sitting at a computer, even though After Effects ends up being sitting at a computer. I was interested in film in high school and here at William & Mary, and I took the film classes that were discussing films. Like there was a class where we were reading stories from women authors in France, Germany, and Spain, and watching movies. It was about World War II, I think. So we were watching movies that were made about that time or during that time. No production classes though, but okay, I've lost my train of thought. I started enjoying film, but I think part of why I like animation is because I can do it myself without a big crew and have complete control. So a little bit of a control freak.